Hi ladies, it's Thursday. That's a little strange that it's not Monday, but I really appreciate Jess switching days with me this week because the last few days have been absolutely insane. So this week we are talking about The Fault in Our Stars, and the first thing that I want to talk about is the author's note at the beginning, which is just, I mean, I can hear John reading it. It's quintessentially John Green when he has his serious face on. It says, "This is not so much an author's note as an author's reminder of what was printed in small type a few pages ago. This book is a work of fiction. I made it up. Neither novels or their readers benefit from attempts to divine whether any facts hide inside a story. Such efforts attack the very idea that made-up stories can matter, which is sort of the foundational assumption of our species. I appreciate your cooperation in this matter." I thought that was very, very interesting when I first read this book. And I've only read this book once. I read it when it came out. I thought then, and I still think now, that that's pretty much John's way of saying, don't assume that this is Esther Earle's story. I know John has made statements to the effect of Esther had a great influence on the story as it is, and he'd been working on the story for a very long time, off and on, but he probably never would have finished it without knowing Esther and her family. But also, John would never presume to tell Esther's story. When I was at VidCon, on Saturday, it was August 3rd, which is Esther Day, Esther's birthday, and so I went to a meetup that they had for This Star Won't Go Out, and it was really cool to just be there with Esther's parents on Esther Day. I didn't know her personally, of course, but I was touched by her and her story and her family's story and all that they've done in the aftermath with This Star Won't Go Out, and it was just neat to be there. And her dad spoke a little bit about, you know, John asking if he could dedicate the book to her and letting them read it before it was published, and of course their response was like, yes, please dedicate this to Esther, like how could we say no to that? But he also talked about how, you know, The Fault in Our Stars is not Esther's story. There are a lot of similarities between Esther and Hazel, especially with the kind of cancer that Hazel has, but it's not Esther's story. However, the exciting thing is that Penguin is going to be publishing Esther's story in January. They're going to publish the last 2 years of her journals and things, and I will put a link to that in the description box. On Monday, Jess talked about the passage where Hazel is describing an imperial affliction, and she talks about how there are some books that fill you with this weird evangelical zeal and you want to share them with everybody, and then there are some books that you want to keep to yourself because sharing them just feels like a betrayal. And I have to admit, I've never had that. I've never had a book that I want to keep to myself. I love books so much, and the books I love, I want to share them with everybody. Like, all of the good books fill me with this weird evangelical zeal. Harry Potter and The Fault in Our Stars are, you know, two huge examples of that. I honestly believe that the way to solve a lot of our problems, not the only way, but a big part of it, is to share stories, and to, you know, share stories that make people think and make people, you know, put themselves in other people's shoes and imagine the world complexly. That's just something I've never experienced. You know, it's interesting that Hazel feels that way about an imperial affliction, but it's not something I can identify with. One thing that really stuck out to me this time is how John describes Augustus when we first see him. He talks about his posture being aggressively poor. You know, that's such an interesting way to describe something, and it gives you this very, very clear picture of a teenage boy who thinks he's just kind of awesome. And also the line that Augustus says about, "I am on a roller coaster that only goes up." I love that line, and I just have to say that at LeakyCon 2012, I was sitting in the elevator bank that was in the basement where most of the conference stuff was taking place, and I saw John get out of an elevator and say, "I'm on an elevator that only goes up," and I about died. It was one of the best moments of my life. The last thing that I have to say this week is that I'm kind of expecting a different experience reading this book this time around. When I read the book when it came out in 2012, I had never personally known someone with cancer. And it's kind of amazing that I made it to 23 years old without knowing somebody who had cancer. When you think about it, cancer seems so omnipresent in the world today. But since then, I got to know a little boy at school. He was in the kindergarten class that I was an aide for last year, who has a certain kind of blood cancer, and he was absolutely one of my favorite children. He's the friendliest, smiliest little boy. That's just his personality, you know, and you think about what he goes through with his medications and his surgeries and all of that, it just blows me away. And then also in November, I think, last year, my aunt was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and fortunately she's doing well right now, but I don't think she's in remission yet. So it's going to be interesting this time around, seeing if I feel differently about some of the things in this book. But I'm looking forward to going through it more, and I can't wait to see what Laurel has to say tomorrow and what everybody else has to say next week. Bye, girls!